Hello, I'm Ariel Garten, and welcome to the podcast, where we get inside the head of people who are skilled in neuroscience, meditation, and various mental arts. Today, we're going to turn the microphone inside and, by popular request, actually interview Chris Aimone, who's my co-founder at Muse. He is one of the best technologists I have ever met, and he spent the last decade researching the body, the brain, the mind, and how you apply technology to create greater and deeper understanding. In Chris's background, he started as an electrical engineer, was trained by Dr. Steve Mann, who, as many of you may know, is the accredited inventor of the wearable computer. He and Steve in the early 90s ran around with cameras on their faces, which were the early prototypes to Google Glass. He created yo-yos that generated energy that were award-winning, water-based musical instruments.
And random collage of crazy things.
Which you will hear more about. And so I'm completely honored today to invite you all inside the head of my friend, partner in crime, and brilliant head, Chris Aimone. Welcome, Chris.
Awesome.
So today we're going to start by talking about your early inventions. Where did the urge to create start for you?
Oh, God, I just got asked this.
Oh, good.
I think in the early part of my life, I was a lot more interested in how things worked. And I think whenever I tried to create things, I was always frustrated by my own ability to execute things in a way that I was satisfied with. And so I spent a lot of time imagining things and also working on pieces of things with things that I knew how to do. But it wasn't really until, let's say, mid to late high school that I started making things for to a completion that wasn't for another purpose that someone required. So I did build some things because there was a need for it, and it made sense to execute things to a completion in that situation. Like I made this video camera system where there was I used skateboard wheels and I built a track so I could do these smooth panning video shots to analyze people's walking, their gait analysis that was required for different kinds of therapy and research. And so I had someone ask me to do that. So that was something that I built. And at the similar time, I made a system for doing strength testing based upon some old technology that was sort of got revitalized with some new ideas and new tech. But when left to my own devices, I often would just imagine and not make things just because I didn't yet have the tools to create what I wanted to create. And so I found that pretty frustrating. And so as I've gone through my life, I've created more and more and more because I had enough tools and experience to actually bring the visions that I had into fruition. But yeah, in the beginning, as a young person, I would be frustrated with the fact that I couldn't, replicate a car, or something that I saw in the world. I'd want to make something different, but because I didn't have the tools to do it, I wasn't satisfied with making, a crude manifestation of it. I wanted it to work as well. And yeah, so it's interesting. And, when you asked me that question, I thought back and I was like, well, there was a lot of things I was interested in and I explored lots of things. I was fascinated with how things work and I would take everything apart. But, and I would not even take things apart. I would take things apart and I would remake pieces of it just to prove to myself that I understood how it worked. But I would never necessarily take all those parts and actually recreate something new because it's like I didn't have all the pieces. So it's interesting that doesn't hold me back so much now, and maybe it's because I have really grasped the value of prototyping things and the value of a crude prototype. But when I was very young, I was just like, this is not what I'm imagining. What's the use in making it?
So there's a perfectionism that was holding you back.
Total perfectionism. Just did not see the value in creating crude things. Because I think what I appreciated about the gadgets, technology, the things in the world that I interacted with was the like the polish on it, the how it all came together to one experience, and um, maybe came from being pretty embodied in my own like physical experience. But if I held something that was pretty ragged in its manifestation, it would not have a satisfying like physicality to it that I could appreciate. So some things easily satisfied that. I could make wood carvings. Um, I remember building skateboard ramps. That was amazing. I could ride it, you know. But when it came to things that someone might consider to be more technological, um, yeah, mostly it was just making small things work. I was like, yeah, okay, I get it now. I understand how the universe works. I know how I can use this. And then I was satisfied then to go on and understand the next thing. Um,
Did programming open up a whole new world for you when you could actually start to write instructions for how something should work?
it did. I think um, one thing that was quite cool about growing up with the let's say the crude personal computers, simple personal computers, is it was very easy to understand them. So
Just don't move your mic. You're going to hear that in the mic.
um, so I found that computers were a lot like machines. They still are, but at that time it was really easy to appreciate all of their inner workings.
Mhm.
And programming a computer was a really great way to understand how it worked. And so at the time, it was another thing to understand. And it was more complicated in the sense that there was something that was hidden now, that you couldn't see the machinery. But still, there was a simplicity to it. So it's something that as a young person, I could grasp and start to figure out. And so once I, um, understood it, then the possibility of being able to write instructions as a way of creating was super interesting. But I really wanted things to um, have like a. I didn't like something that was just simply virtual in a box. I
Mhm.
wasn't super interested in video games, for example. So the idea of creating an interaction and a story inside of a machine wasn't as interesting as creating something that had um, an element that was, I could interact with physically. So I was way more interested in robotics. I was interested in making machines that could do interesting, intelligent things. But the idea of just making an interaction that existed inside of a computer it was cool, but it still lived in the land of like, I understand what I could maybe do with this, but it's not what I'm called to do.
So I remember some of your cool, probably wasn't your early robotics as we met in our early 20s, but in your early 20s, I remember you made a robot that could paint, would crawl up the wall and paint its way up and down.
Yeah, I think one reason why I created that is I had over the years collected so many, bizarre bits of machinery, electronics, old computers in my garage, my parents' garage at the time,
In
and
Scarborough.
in Scarborough. And I had a friend who, had decided to open up a space, a temporary art gallery, and she's like, "Oh, could you make something, cool and technological, but can you make a piece of art that would come in here?" And I was just like, "Sure. I mean, what can I do that I can make use of all this junk and also had um, you know a whimsical nature to it." So I think it was the first totally useless thing I ever made. Um, and maybe it broke the ice in a lot of crazy new stuff, but it was totally useless. It used the printer from a Commodore 64 combined with a bunch of other, I think I took my rollerblades apart and I bought windshield wiper motors that would go in your car. I used computer mice as optical encoders. There's just
Awesome.
bizarre stuff, but then I made this gangly kind of robotic arm that would hold a paintbrush. And it
sort
would
of satisfyingly thwop it against the wall.
it would reach backwards and dip the brush into a bucket of paint, and then it would like stick it on this giant canvas, and then it would start to move it around. My father was happy that I took his old propane tank away. I think I used it as a counterweight, filled with the right amount of water.
Right, I should mention this thing was like 8 or 9 feet high because it would go all the way up the wall.
Yeah, it was probably, what was it, like, it was 8 feet high and probably
Maybe
12 feet
15
wide.
across,
It was really big. And it used, I think, 4 computers. So I think, I used every last bit of junk that I had kicking around, but it painted some really amazing stuff. It had a camera that would continuously observe whatever was happening in the gallery and whoever came in, and it would just essentially paint what it saw. And it painted really slowly. So it was really hard to make sense of anything that it painted. But the robot painter was silly.
So you got to work with Steve Mann and really create some of the early Google Glass type form factors. At the time, Steve was calling it iTap. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
There's like a ton to share about that. Steve's a pretty incredible guy. I'd say any would-be inventor would learn so much from working with him. He's somebody who just has an unquenchable creative spirit. He just cannot stop creating new things. And he really inspires somebody to just to go for it and build whatever you can build using whatever means you have. So I think in that experience, I, in many ways, learned the craft of being an inventor. And it just came from, working with him, the two of us, we did so much together, but really just, nothing would really ever hold us back from trying something.
Yeah.
So we'd have an idea, and whatever we had available, we would just do it. And it's in that process that you really learn the value of creating something to allow yourself to see around the next corner. You believe that you can imagine what things will be like when you create it, but the reality is you can't. And no matter how much you know, how much experience you have, whenever you create something new, when you get a chance to play with it, experience it with yourself and with other people, like amazing new discoveries happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of thing that really helps you do the right things. If you want to create something that truly has value to others, then you have to just get out there and try it and learn through the process of doing. So wild experience. But we started working with each other when I was in third year university.
What year was this?
I don't know. Can you do the math for me?
Probably 98 for you.
98? No, I think it was a little bit after that.
Okay.
Maybe it was 99. Yeah.
In 98, I graduated. 98, end of 98 was my first year, and you're born in February.
Okay.
So it would have been 98, 99.
Glad someone can do math. I always had a computer to help me out. So I was in third year, and Steve at some point had given a presentation to the undergrads, and I thought what he was working on was fascinating. And one day, was in class and met somebody who said they were working with Steve, and I thought I'd come back to his lab and see what he was working on. And at the time, so Steve, one of the things that he would do is he would always have kind of a revolving door policy with the students. And so if you were interested in coming and collaborating, you could just come and start collaborating. Not that I knew that at the time, but my experience was, hey, I'd love to work with this person. I'd totally resonate with the things that they're creating. What an opportunity to go and just see what they're up to. And so I followed somebody back to his lab at the university, and I go to the front door, and they're in this conversation about the wearable computer that he was currently wearing. And he was saying, somebody came and really wanted to have a wearable computer like the one I'm wearing to record his experience when receiving, I think it was a Juno. And I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was Bruce Cockburn.
Whoa.
And so he's just like, yeah, so like this is like an incredible opportunity. Should we do this? It'll take us away from what we're working on. Should we go ahead and look at building one for him? And I was like, well, I could do that. So, I think in the space of 1 hour, I went from not, knowing someone to entering into a really intense, deep relationship of building something with them. And so we immediately started building wearable computers together. And though we never finished the piece for Bruce, Steve still to this day wears the computer that I made for him during that time.
Wow.
So he was, his attitude was, well, if we're going to make this, you should just make one for me first. And I was like, well, that makes sense, right? This person does not know what I'm capable of. And this is the best way for us to learn. And so I said, okay, sure. Well, let's start there. And so, and I think this went on for about a month or two. And it was the first time I had gotten into any of this kind of technology. But he and I worked together and we built something that was very cool that he still wears to this day. And in many ways, you mentioned what Google made. What Google made looks almost identical to what we made together at that time in 1999.
Yeah, it's amazing. I would look at photos of Google Glass in 2012 when they first came out and what Steve built with you in the late 90s, and literally side by side, they're almost identical.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. We were a bit early.
Yeah, definitely. Steve's always early.
Yeah, but that's where our relationship started. But it started with a bang, and I think it's a very, very cool way to operate, especially with students who are learning, is just to really give them an opportunity to engage and to excite their imagination. Because when it comes to invention, it's all about that. There's a lot of things you need to learn, but unless you really have the passion to create, then you never really have the incentive to figure everything out. So very cool.
So from there, first of all, can you describe what it was like actually wearing the early iTaps and early Google Glass? There's some amazing photos of you on the internet wearing a beautiful piece that's just, over one of your eyes that I know you probably milled yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was the experience of wearing technology on your face that early?
You
didn't know it was that early. It's just nobody else was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it was really confusing. It's nice to have a young brain to be able to learn a new way of seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating to realize that if you were to have a pair of glasses that flipped your vision upside down, you would actually adapt to it quite quickly. I think looking back now, it's kind of crazy that I would take such liberties with my own nervous system to be able to learn these crazy new sort of computer interfaces that really was deeply related to how I would perceive the world, like through vision. But there are still things that we did at that time which haven't really been done yet, which is hard to believe. I think only now we're starting to see some very cool augmented reality applications. And this is what we're working on. The difference is when you run the camera feed through a computer and then reconstitute the light using a display, there was a latency in that.
Yeah.
And that really came from the speed of the computer. So
speed of the computers at that time, 20 years ago.
At the time, yeah. And they weren't portable either. Like we would ram backpacks filled with batteries and giant things.
I remember I wore some of those backpacks skating, making music on what Steve called the Pogo Phone with a twiddler in my hand to change the sound that came off my ice skate with the computer on my back. Yeah. Made music while I skated.
Oh, the
Truly
Pogo
Canadian
Phone.
invention.
We still need one of those. I think that, to go down a ski hill on your skis or snowboard or skating and to make music, with the sound is super cool. Yeah, I still want that experience. Yeah, so, anyway, I'd like to come back to that because that's just very, very cool invention. But yeah, so the experience of wearing a device like this that participated with what you saw, the experience, first of all, had if you were to move around a lot, was challenging because there was a latency and also the frame rate was quite low. And so when you're just getting used to it, it's quite nausea-inducing. Like there's kind of like a threshold where everything just becomes like super motion sickness prone, which we now
like early VR.
Yeah, I mean, even contemporary VR, we're just starting to sort of break the threshold there where we can have an experience where anybody can jump in and not have a total, motion sickness moment. But at that time, you're trying. It's like being on a ship that's always moving. Your vision's always swimming around like this. But if you were stationary, there were some very cool things that you could do. And Steve's idea, which still really hasn't really been embodied in any of the current augmented reality devices, is to have a camera that was optically positioned through a variety of different means to really see exactly what your eye would see.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful thing about that is when you take that image and you do some computer vision processing on it, and then you recreate some computer graphics, it is absolutely and perfectly aligned with the natural world as you see it. So, the simple to understand application is, you're speaking to somebody. What if you wanted to put their name on their shirt? You'd need it to stick to that. Mm-hmm. So we have means of doing that now, but when you actually see it projected onto your retina, and you're also seeing natural light passing through the glasses. If a body's quite big, so it's not hard to put the label in it, but it's going to be like here or there or somewhere. But if you start to do precise things, like start to increase contrast in somebody's face in a situation where it's hard to see them, or you're trying to add information to something where the alignment is important. Like I'm staring at a whiteboard right now, and I want to see the last time I drew on it. Then the tolerance for misregistration is really low, and it still is impossible to account for that misalignment because we don't necessarily have an image which really reflects what the person is seeing. So you'll have all these misregistration problems. And so when it comes to creating a compelling mixed reality experience where you have virtual objects, content, information, which has been seamlessly embedded in the real visual world that you perceive, it's like an absolutely necessary criteria to satisfy. The alternative is, when you look at your phone, then you can you're seeing the image of a camera on your screen, and you put a virtual thing on top. So the registration works, right? But it's different if you're actually staring through a display. But one thing that's interesting is even the crudest computer graphics, when there's perfect alignment, creates an experience that feels like reality. So doing something simple like accentuating the outline of objects or a person, and you can just do this by taking a computer, like an image, and then doing an edge detection on it, and then drawing on those pixels that are on the edges, the sharp changes in contrast. And if you walk around the world, everything has this kind of glowing like aspect to it. Like all of the parts which define objects in separation have this beautiful glowing aura to it, and it's almost like that an experience of this is the way things are. Mm-hmm. Objects just have an aura to them. Mm. And so it was wild just experiencing how easily the mind can start to accommodate that kind of experience and start to integrate it into something that really feels like this is the way things are. So just being able to appreciate that from, my own, like a self-understanding, and recognition of perception was really beneficial and growing experience, to even recognize that we have perception.
Okay.
Um,
So in the early 90s, you were able to create and generate these amazing experiences that shifted your perception with mixed reality.
that's right.
And then from there, how did you get an interest in creating things and experiences for the mind? So to me, the window between perception and mental experience is, that is the same window to me.
Yeah.
And part of my inspiration in creating things around in the brain was the understanding that we can shift our perspectives and our perception so easily. And so it allowed us to change the way we see the world and allows us to change the way we see ourselves and free ourselves from our stories.
Yeah.
That was sort of my mental shift there. What was your experience that sort of brought you into the realm of the mind?
So, I think part of it was simply being a creator and recognizing the limitations that I had with being able to consider all the different dimensions of a problem. And so I was fascinated in the possibility of having a tool which could work with my own, sensory abilities in a way that I could have the right information available to me in the context of trying to figure something out. And so that's where I started. And I was like, now, if I were to wear a computer, it can augment what I see. I can bring together a greater depth of information for the task that I'm focusing on at that time. And part of the recognition around perception was just that, in some ways, what you see is all there is. That visual experience can be so dominant that having the right things available to you at the right time can make all the difference. It's like, how do you keep your desk? Do you keep it cluttered with different things? Do you keep it clean? Do you put objects on it that inspire you? Just noting that kind of thing had a heavy influence on what was available to me in terms of an inspiration in the creative moment or in every moment, So how do we keep our environment as a way for us to have the right state of mind and the right inspiration to create what we care about?
Mm-hmm.
The other part of it was the simple and profound recognition of perception and how it really isn't a fixed quantity. So we, until I had an experience like this where I could augment what I saw and could experience this shift of now seeing something new as reality, I wasn't able to recognize the way I saw things as being, a potential slice of many possible realities. So, yeah. So I think we have different experiences in life where our senses act up in different ways. Or we start to see the fact that the world that we experience is one solution from our senses that our brains are able to provide for us. And so when you participate in an augmented reality experience, or as Steve would call it, a mediated reality experience, you're starting to mess with what you perceive. And I think, as you said, there are powerful ways that we can work with and recreate our perception of things. But the first realization you need to make is that we have a perception and there are other alternatives.
Yep.
And I think that's a difficult experience to have at an experiential level where it really hits home. I think it's one of those things that someone told me conceptually, and I was like, okay, I get it, right? But I didn't experience it.
Yeah.
And so it had an empty quality to the idea, and in a sense that I didn't really believe it. I was just like, oh yeah, I know what's going on for me, you know? And I have an idea that, okay, well, we can each perceive things differently. But the idea that still there was a realism to what I experienced that I couldn't see around. But when you actually see your brain adapt in a short amount of time to something different, and that becomes how you experience the world, you're like, oh, wow. Suddenly I cannot consider my experience to be a fixed quantity, and that there are many different realities available to me, which, suddenly this is really valuable information now. The first piece of information was, hey, maybe we see things differently, maybe your world's different than my world. But I think the potent experience for me was your world can be different. And there might be ways of taking you to other worlds.
Yeah, you can now have a choice about the world that you're in potentially.
Yeah, so you start to give yourself a bit more freedom around, this sort of impenetrable idea that this is the way things are. It gives you a place to start a curious exploration about, other ways that you might experience things. Am I too narrow in my view? Am I too rooted in this way of seeing things? Maybe I'm missing something because I have a view. So yeah, that brought up a lot of stuff for me. And I think that was the moment that I got most interested in the plasticity of the mind and about the way we perceive things and how it creates the reality of our life, and far-reaching implications to that. But my interest in the mind was there's another dimension to working with this kind of technology, and that is you need to create computers that can sense the world, and because the idea in a cybernetic system is you have a human and a computer working together, it's important that let's say, technological side of yourself can have a relatable perspective on what's happening to you as a human being. Otherwise, it's hard for that the symbiosis to be very fruitful.
Yep.
It's like having different values. It makes for a bad relationship. So challenging
that may
relationship.
be a later question.
So I think the interest in the mind, there's a huge part of the experience of creating technology that's very human-centric, which is trying to to extract information from the world which mirrors how we experience things as a human being. So if you're going to see something with a camera, I would like that camera and computer to interpret that scene what is in the way that I would perceive it. So on a simple level, it's like there's a person here, right? And I'm perceiving a person. So now my symbiotic technological partner says, okay, we are in the field of relationship because there's another human being here. Maybe I shouldn't pop up a notification.
Yeah.
And then it could be seeing that you're in conversation. So again, you can be sensitive to that condition. But at a very low level, trying to have a technological device either hear or see or perceive the world, and to come up with features of it that are human relevant. It ends, as a creator, as the engineer, scientist, technologist, whatever you want to call the person, you have to just go deep inside your own experience and say, what do I think is happening here? And can I try to gain inspiration from this to teach this machine how to do something? And I would say in some ways things are changing a little bit now. There's very cool stuff happening in AI that can give some new levers to pull on in this problem. But at the time, drawing inspiration from how I would experience the world was the most important thing. And so it demanded a very deep inner exploration to try to understand what my senses were doing. Or so what my senses were doing, and also if I was going to receive information, what is an appropriate way to receive information. So it didn't create a tension. If I'm going to feel something, if I'm working in the level of physical feeling and touch, what is it like to, break that interface and feed it back to myself through sound or through vision?
Okay. I want to take you back to Steve's lab in 2002 and 2003.
Mm-hmm.
We had this early brain-computer interface system with a computer with an ISA card and a bunch of fiber optic cable.
Yeah.
And we started to create experiences around it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could teleport people back to the science lab feel of all that.
Yep.
So Steve's lab, even today, has always been a really quirky and crazy place. But we, got this EEG data, and it, as you said, it came through a fiber optic cable. And we looked at the power spectrum of it by doing a FFT on it, and you square the result, and you look at the aggregation over different brain bands, and we looked at the alpha band, which undergoes large changes with changes in what you're seeing and also your state of consciousness. And so I remember that the first day we got this thing working, the various people there taking turns at trying to push the signal up or down. So super cool experience. I think for me, what was most fascinating about it, looking back, is for everybody involved, myself included, it was totally intuitive to try to change your state of consciousness as a means of affecting this output. And so everybody had a different way of doing it. We all had a different feeling inside of ourselves that we would tune into that was special to us. We knew it. And I'm sure it was different for every person. But for myself, I tuned into this quiet, weightless feeling. It's this feeling, maybe it's, I'd feel it when I was about to go to sleep. I'd feel it when I was trying to imagine a problem when I'd close my eyes. But it was going into this state of consciousness that I had somehow found and cultivated over the years. And so that was the first thing I tried. It was, achieving an altered state of consciousness to understand and explore a technology.
Amazing.
And, it was.
So I remember I slipped on an EEG probably on the back of my head, and I was in conversation with Steve in the lab. I can't remember who else was in the room, but I was staring at Steve's pants. There was somebody who'd come in, like a third party, maybe like a newspaper reporter or something kind of important. And I was sitting in the room with Steve and that guy, and I was sitting on a table staring at Steve's pants. And I think you'd probably, or James had programmed the system so that as you focused on it, or as you changed your state, I don't remember what the threshold was, it would go up and down in an arpeggio. So, and as I stared at Steve's pants, the arpeggiator went up. And the more I stared, like the louder the signal got, or the higher it went. And then I moved my eyes away, and then it went down. And I stared at Steve's pants, and it went up. And the guy who was in the room had no idea what was going on. He had no idea that there was a sound that was being controlled. It was my own private internal experience. And that was the first time I got it. And I was like, wow, the more I stare, the more I can change the system. Steve's black pants. It's like the most, burned in the back of my head forever, that experience.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. So what came next for you? I mean, do you remember what happened after that experience?
So from there, once we had that, it was like, okay, let's try to play around with it. Now that I recognize I can have that control, what else can we do? Like, what other sounds can we program in? Can we now make this sonorous in some way? I think it wasn't an arpeggiator at that point. It was just a tone. It was a tone like. So step 2 was, can you make that interesting? Can you arpeggiate it? Is there something that you can do that's going to then make something you'd want to control in the world?
That's interesting.
And that was, I think from there came the concerts.
Yeah. That's very likely what happened.
Yeah.
I disappeared for a while.
You went to Australia.
Because I went to Australia. And so the sound arpeggiation happened after I left. But I think if I'd experienced that with you, I think something different might have happened for me. It was my experience was I did not think about what I wanted to control. It's interesting that that's what happened for me. I was totally uninterested in what I could build with this. I was way more interested in what other states of consciousness I could explore with it.
Cool.
Because it was just very interesting to have something which recognized an inner experience that I was having in a way where I could make a measurement. And so it's like, if you're trying to go somewhere, the thing that keeps you from just blindly reaching out in the dark, and potentially just wandering around in circles, is being able to have some, waypoints, so you can actually have a point of reference and know that you're going somewhere. And so being able to make a measurement of something, if you decide to go further, it's a reference point. And so suddenly there were reference points for different states of consciousness, different ways of experiencing. And so that's what happened to me. And maybe like departing to Australia at that time, insulated me from thinking I just could control everything, under the sun with my brain. But that was what I was left with was, wow, we can measure in some way different states of consciousness. I know they make me feel different, and I know that I've already found value in my life of being able to use them. So if I wanted to think about something, I would enter another state of consciousness where that was a lot more fruitful or easier to do. And I never would have called it that at the time. Mm-hmm. I'm still hesitant to call it that now. But now there was something that measured the fact that something was different about my brain when I did that.
That's amazing. And for me, it became, what can we create with this? If this is an interpretation of our mind or a making visible of the mind, how can we then use it as a tool for creation with the mind? So that for me, it turned into this artistic exploration. Mm-hmm. How can we listen to the sound of our mind and then make beautiful music with our mind? How can we, paint with our brain? How can we make art with it? And so, because I was sort of tied up with this notion of like perception in the brain, mm-hmm. It was more of a sense of like, how can we perceive what's going on in our mind and then project that in a way that's going to let somebody else have an experience of that mind and what it can create.
Interesting.
So it was like a sense of shared creation.
Interesting.
And like a transmission of creation.
So I would say I've come back a little bit from where I was at, and I've become far more interested in a creative experience with the mind. But I experience it differently than you do a little bit. Yeah. And something that I find in my own creative practice is I don't have this sense of, wow, I see this amazing thing in my mind. I just need a better interface to transcribe it. I hear beautiful music. I just want to be able to transmit it. I have a beautiful vision. I just want to be able to draw it. And my own experience is one where what happens is very much an interactive experience with my environment. And so if I pick up an instrument, the sound that occurs to me to play at any one moment, actually, I don't have an experience of like, I'd like to play this and I'm going to make the sound with it, but rather it's like a feedback process where in every moment, the creative happening mm-hmm. is as much related to the sound that I'm hearing as it is the experience of perceiving it and having an idea in my head. Like it's a very like naughty problem.
Yeah, there's a sound that's being made, which then inspires you to make or to change that sound.
Well, actually, I feel like when I'm being the most authentic, there's no I anymore. Mm-hmm. I have no sense of I'm going to do this thing. It just happens. Mm-hmm. And so the thing that I've become interested in is creating an experience where that kind of happening becomes more intuitive. And so I found meditation super interesting because in many ways it is the practice of observing what arises in the moment as opposed to being goal-oriented about something.
Mm-hmm.
And the me, it kind of takes a back seat a little bit. And so when you really get in the flow of something, it's almost like that person disappears.
Yeah.
And so when we create a sound experience that is connected to your mind, if I were to think about that as being a tool, like an instrument, I'd be very frustrated because I'd say, okay, is this as good an interface as a piano keyboard? I want to play these notes, but I can't, because there's something ineffective in the interface. So in that way, I don't see it as a tool for expression, but actually a tool to discover the creative source. And so when I engage in a biofeedback experience where I'm just allowing things to happen as they will, but also the sound that I'm creating is coming from me, and it's also what I'm perceiving. So it's this really interesting feedback loop of allowing yourself to express whatever's there and being a curious observer to whatever that happening is. So I found that there are times where that actually lands super close to those treasured creative experiences where that feeling of self disappears and you simply are the creation. You are the art that you're creating.
Beautiful. So if we fast forward to 2014, we have Muse that is a tool for meditation to help you discover the self. And to 2018, a tool that helps you do a whole new kind of biofeedback that we're going to talk about shortly.
Mm-hmm.
But I sort of feel like we want to fill in the intervening gaps that got us there. So from the crazy concerts in Steve's lab, we then created the levitating chair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what comes to mind when I say levitating chair?
Noisy.
Winch from the hardware store on the ceiling going, "Arr," as this chair is magically rising to the sky.
Yeah, that's one of those things where beautiful concept, and I was terribly frustrated with the manifestation of it because it was magical.
Totally magical.
But inside that chair, it was a perfect resonator for the sound of the winch that it was connected to. It was kind of a musical instrument. We should have called it the musical levitating chair.
It's a very Steve name.
I still would love to make a levitating chair that is silent because
so we've had many requests to remake the levitating chair. And now we can afford to spend more than $66 on the winch.
It's true. Yeah.
I remember being in Canadian Tire trying to pick out which winch, and they all had pictures of a hookup at the back of a pickup truck and where your winch would connect to.
I hope someday we'll be able to do that one justice.
Indeed.
There is an obviously deep connection between our physiological, somatic experience and our state of mind. So to be able to link those two things in a direct way would be super, super cool to experience.
Well, that was part of the concept at that point with you and Trevor and I was the idea that we could literally move the world with our minds. We could control physical objects. And so we actually were able to not just take our own somatic experience, but the experience of the objects in the world and connect ourselves to them and be able to levitate them, move them. It's extraordinary.
Oh, dreamers.
So then we went on to dream about something even sillier, the Olympics.
You consider that to be silly?
That was, in terms of dreaming, in terms of having a grand, weird vision, that was kind of as big as you get.
It's true.
We didn't realize how big it was when we thought about it.
Yeah. I those experiences that break down the inner barriers you have about what's possible.
Yes.
We all need those experiences to be well, let's reset here. Why do I think something isn't possible? is this something that I'm creating for myself, or is it really not possible? So that was one of those moments where I personally had to do a massive reset of just like, oh, it's really my own thought of what's possible that's holding me back here. And it was so cool to be able to do that together of, you know, connecting with things that, had this massive presence in one's childhood.
Yeah.
Like standing in front of Niagara Falls is so powerful and larger than life. And to have a thought that you could now wave a magic wand with your mind and paint something on such a massive scale. Yeah, total trip.
And that project, the ante kept getting higher and higher and higher. So for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, we got to control the lights on the CN Tower, Canadian Parliament, and Niagara Falls with people's brains from across the country in 2010. And we proposed this installation to the Canadian government at the time. And we said that we'd control the lights and some lighting in 5 rings, looking like the Olympic ring symbol, which of course is highly protected, and we couldn't do that. And so the government kept coming back to us and saying, well, can you propose something else that we can do? And we had thoughts like, we could make a big lake and have trees like we were in Muskoka and have them go up and down with people's brains. And another one of our ideas was have balloons, and you could, inflate balloons with helium and then write your thoughts on them, and they'd float into some big sculpture. Do you remember any of our other ideas?
We imagined these massive spotlights.
Yes, like cannons of light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you could project your consciousness into outer space, and express the beat of your heart in these beams of light.
Because at the time there was an artist who just did an installation with holding on to either side of a light and actually having your heart be transmitted so that it would pulse with your heart. And so we had this idea that you could do the same thing with your brain, plus your heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of some of our other ideas. Remember something with an elephant for some reason. I can see
really?
this. Yeah, I can see this. It was a fake elephant. I can see the sketches in front of me. It's a merry-go-round one.
You might be dreaming here.
No, I wish we had these sketches somewhere.
I don't remember the elephant or the merry-go-round. Oh, I remember the merry-go-round.
See? Not crazy. And then there was sort of this distant feeling that wouldn't it be great if we could control the lights on the CN Tower? But it was as if nobody wanted to say it because it seemed like that couldn't be possible. Mm-hmm. And then finally, John Beatty from the government came back to us and said, what about the CN Tower? And it was sort of this moment that like the sky cracked up and we were like, we could do that?
Yeah.
And then more and more icons got piled on top of it. Well, if you do the CN Tower, then you also have to do Niagara Falls and the Parliament buildings. Oh, and an ice house in Nipissing, because that's where the PM is from, the MPP, the Member of Parliament from our...
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I wish for all the people that actually tried it, where they were able to go and experience firsthand the scale of what they were doing.
Yeah.
I think those people who've been to Toronto or Niagara Falls had that connection. I know we did, because we were in the lighthouse in Niagara Falls trying to hook up computers and things to this ancient lighting system.
The raccoons.
The raccoons
crawling on the ceiling, yeah.
Or like up in the CN Tower, and there was like you had to go way up the CN Tower into this room that actually had the feed from their lighting system. And I remember mounting an umbrella over our computer because they had a small leak in the ceiling. So we had our computer mounted in, this place next to all these TV stations, and then this like little umbrella, something, maybe it was the air conditioning or something, but actually being underneath the CN Tower, the first time that we actually connected everything together, was just totally awe-inspiring.
Do you remember before we did that, just to check that our lighting system could actually connect into the lighting on the CN Tower, we just played like Winamp. We just played like the Windows program and forced it through the CN Tower, and all of a sudden you saw like the Winamp colors on the CN Tower off of our laptop. That to me was a magic moment.
Yeah. Or we when we created a simulator So there were moments where you couldn't actually connect to the CN tower because it was either too light to see the lights or there was cloud or something. So we made simulators. And so we were on, was it Toronto Island or were we at Polson Pier? But I remember there, like on the phone saying, okay, can you play the next pattern? You know, and we had a camera and we were actually taking photographs that we would eventually composite together into a really compelling and amazing simulation of the experience.
Yeah, not simulating the brain. The brain was still doing it, but we were simulating what was happening on the tower.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Chris, who at DeCastro, who was my boyfriend at the time and now my husband, did the comps.
That's right.
Compiled the images.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was in a cold winter's night there on the cell phone saying, can you put the next pattern on the tower? And I'm sure everyone in Toronto wondering what's going on. Yeah. You know, is the CN tower broken? It's doing these like really strange lighting patterns.
One pixel at a time.
One pixel at a time. Yeah, it was totally wild experience.
Do you remember the first people actually doing the experience at Ontario House? So at Ontario House, you would sit down in front of 3 large screens that would each project live either the CN Tower, Canadian Parliament, or Niagara Falls, so you could see in real time what you were doing on the screens. Or we would show you the simulation of the CN or Niagara if you couldn't see it because of the weather. Do you remember actually somebody experiencing it?
Well, when you said the first time, the first thing that came to mind was like the terrors of demoing any new piece of tech for the first time. If there's any creators out there, you know what I'm talking about.
I feel the sensation. Yeah.
You know, nothing ever works like you want it to, especially demo time. And so I would say, you know, we probably spent, I don't know, at least a few days there setting up for all the different possible like edge cases of things going wrong. Because the last thing you want to do, someone sits down to have this experience. And
at the Olympics.
At the Olympics, they waited hours to do it.
Yep.
And like something bad happens and it stops working. So, you know, not only is this such a complicated system communicating over the internet with these like, you know, Niagara Falls is it's really interesting. Where the lights come out of it is this ancient building, you know, and the lights are old war spotlights and with theater gels that robotically go up and down. Like so many things that could possibly go wrong here. Not to mention the fact that we're connecting to people's brains, you know, with like brain sensing is not easy. So we're there, you know, with electrogel, making sure that people have a great first-time experience. And then we're trying to teach them about what to do with their minds.
Oh, without using English, because this had to be at the Olympics. So everybody from every language could have to understand how to focus their brain.
Yeah, so many wild things. But so that's what was going through my head when you're saying the first time someone tried this, I was just like total nail biter. You know? One of my favorite parts of that installation was occasionally there would be a Bluetooth problem. How I love Bluetooth. And it would,
the bane of our continued existence, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody who uses Bluetooth to the edge of its capability has these issues, but sometimes the computer would become unrecoverable because of a problem related to the Bluetooth. And so we had these little remote controls that were meant to turn your Christmas lights on and off. Zip tied to these sculptures that we made that were filled with computers, and if ever the thing totally locked up, you'd press the button and it would actually just shut everything off, power and everything. You'd press it back on again, it would reboot things. But the reboot button was like the Christmas light control, remote control. Don't press the red button.
I remember that because we couldn't actually reach any of the power buttons on the computers because they were inside the installation.
They were packed away in this beautiful sculpture. You know, you couldn't exactly get in there and like start to pull things out. And they built this huge temporary building, and I remember crawling underneath, fishing wires.
Right, I remember that.
So we had like such a complicated setup there, and we had to make it so that every night when there's a concert, we could move everything out of the way. So,
yeah, and so we had these ports in the middle of the floor that came up with our particular wiring rig.
Yeah. So, you know, anyway, building tech is really fun.
You say that, and I feel the like 2 a.m. jet lagged, freezing cold in this temporary building with no heat, starving. Yes, all the sensations return.
Yep.
And so excited and inspired.
Yeah.
And like you're up on adrenaline and you've been up for 60 nights straight and it doesn't matter.
Our whole network set up connected to the towers and whatever in that building. And then we had an equivalent set up in the house we rented.
Yes.
Just like a couple of kilometers away. And so the team would, put on their, warm clothes and they'd walk back to the house and then we'd continue working then through the night, and like, who was the first person that had to wake up in the morning to come and, open everything up and get it started.
And it worked.
It worked.
7,000 people got to control the lights in the CN Tower.
Really well. It was amazing.
Niagara Falls with their brain from across the country.
Yeah.
What was it like, that moment of, wow, this works. We did this. It happened. Brain control is real.
Honestly, like it took me a while to unpack that experience because it's my experience with technology and demo time is unless you're always on it, continuously trying to track towards, where you need to be, keeping on course. So many things end up going wrong. Everything would just stop working. It's inevitable. And so my experience there is being deep in flow, making it work.
Yeah.
And never stopping to go like, whoa, like I had a couple of those moments, and one of those moments was when I think there was the final hockey game, which was just totally bananas. But to have those moments where you stop and go like, where are we? And how are people doing this? And, what was once a total pipe dream, now people are sitting here with their minds, tapping into something they've never experienced before and doing something supremely larger than life, calling their friends and trying to say, hey, do you see the CN Tower? That's my brain. That's me. I'm doing that. What do you mean you're doing that? Yeah. So cool. Magical.
Yeah. And so from there, what did you think was possible? Like, what was the next step for you from that?
So after that experience, we went on a long journey of trying to figure out what we wanted to make of all of this.
Yeah.
And we recognized the huge power and potential for people, but understanding the way this should come to life. You only do an Olympics once, and also it only sees 7,000 people. And this is the kind of experience that everyone should get to try. Yeah. So we went through this long process of seeking. And we didn't always think we were going to make our own headband. We thought we could create experiences and use things that already existed. So we went through a number of journeys. One of them was, should we actually make a product, a physical product? And that was another thing, like the Olympics, which seemed undoable because of all the complexity involved. We knew how to make things. I knew how to make things, but to make things that were one-offs in cost, huge amounts of money because they were custom pieces and there was always somebody there to troubleshoot them. But to create something that everyone would have access to was like, you have to get it made in China?
Yeah.
Like, how do you do that? Do you just go to China and like go and talk to somebody? So, it was really interesting, starting that whole process and how, in this sort of the misty unknown, it's really easy for the mind to go like, oh, too hard. Like, I don't even know where to start. But, then little by little, it unfolds and you start to recognize I have the skills that are required. And if we take the next step, we'll figure out the next step. So, but I remember, at that point we were like, there's nothing out there that a consumer can buy that allows them to do this, that does what we need it to do, and also that has the ease that's required for it to be a successful experience for someone who goes to Best Buy and buys something and takes it home.
Yeah.
And so we always had a handheld experience where we'd help people get suited up to measure their brainwaves, tell them what was going on, what to do, and we would provide that necessary, middle piece of trying to do something as difficult as measuring your brainwaves. And so that was the problem that we actually set out to solve with the creation of the Muse initially, was we really want to create experiences for people. There's huge value here. but there's nothing that's available that really makes it accessible, or not super weird. And so, yeah, that was like a massive undertaking. And along with that is, well, what do you do with it? Because you don't just go and buy a brain sensing headband because you're interested. I mean, some people do, but if you want to really speak to many people, then there has to be a lot more clarity. Not everyone's a garage hacker that wants to build stuff. So we went on another journey as well of trying to understand the right way of adding value to people's lives through this technology.
And to me, that was the driving question. I think for all three of us, you, Trevor, and myself, like, how do we actually add value to somebody's life with this? How is this going to move the needle for somebody? How is this going to move the needle for humanity? How is this going to open us up to something new, something possible? How's this going to be meaningful? And that like driving question of meaning caused us to create installation after installation after installation, being like, what is the answer?
We made so much crazy stuff. We did so much research. We read so much research. We had so many people help us along the way.
Yeah.
Just building thing after thing, searching for what it was. And I remember it might have been you who asked me this question, but it was sort of like, okay, in all the places that we've been, what is that thing that really provides the most value? And I remember racking my brains and thinking, okay, this didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work.
Toaster certainly didn't work.
Toaster didn't work. However, something about it kept me interested. And then I counted the years. How many years have I been interested in this thing? Why? And I was like, I wish I could package the journey. I wish we could just package this journey of looking inside yourself and relating to it through this mirror of yourself.
Yeah.
Because that's the piece that I always found value in, whether it was trying to control a toaster or making music with your mind or trying to, train a new mental skill. Each piece required you to look inside, look at this reflection, and learn about yourself. And that was continuously rewarding. At the time, I didn't know what meditation was. But this was like, I wish we could package the journey of self-discovery and exploration.
Bing, 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 bing.
But there was still for me, there was a bunch of time before we actually landed on like, we're making a meditation tool. Because at the time, I didn't know what meditation was. And it seemed like what I wanted to do was super esoteric. And so I started creating all different kinds of things that could help someone go on the journey for themselves. It was the building the tool set to do this journey of exploration, where you now had a companion, so you could go seeking out in the dark and have those waypoints.
Yeah.
Right back to the very beginning, I had this experience. But yeah, it wasn't until sometime later that we all experienced for ourselves, I think for different reasons, meditation, we all started saying, maybe we should do something with meditation. Yeah. And I remember distinctly when someone said, hey, maybe it was Trevor, said we should do meditation, because he had a meditation practice. And I was like, yeah, we can do that. This was like back to my very first experience. We can do alpha wave neurofeedback and we can help people relax. This was like my thought of meditation.
Your basic understanding of meditation.
My basic understanding of meditation, because my only understanding was I saw pictures of people meditating. That was it. And then
you've come a long way.
It's been a long journey since then, many years. But then when we sort of turned our attention to it, we started inviting meditation teachers to come in.
Yeah.
And that's when like the doors got blown right off for myself, because I had some initial teaching, some books were recommended. I started reading about it. I was just like, whoa, what? Why didn't anybody tell me that humanity's been working on this problem that I've been working on for my whole life as a technologist, really? But actually have done way more than I could possibly imagine. And so there's a bit of frustration of just like, I can't believe no one ever told me, but also of, well, of course we can do this. This is exactly what we've been doing. Yeah. And, it makes complete sense.
Yes, 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 and yes. For me, it was that process of being able to, the description that I have always used was like the door opening on the brain. Throughout this whole thing, as we were allowing people to interact with technology with their mind, it was this feeling of like the door to my brain opening and the invisible process that was inside being finally made visible. And that description that you gave really early on about making things and how that shifted your perception. And when you started to use augmented reality, that idea that your perception can shift. To me, that's what the sensation of Muse was, before it was Muse, was that your perception of the world and how you relate to your brain can shift. And that was like, that to me is like the later aha of meditation, that your perception of your world and therefore your perception of yourself can shift because you can interact with it. You can change it.
Yeah. Well, I think the magical thing that I saw with anybody who, we played with this for so many years, right? We would invite all different kinds of people to try this out. And
at raves, at parties, at
in science labs,
in science museums.
Yeah.
Recording EEG on the top of a mountain with a woman jumping up and down through the jhanas. Seasoned meditators.
Mentally jumping, just to be clear.
Yeah, mentally jumping through the jhanas. Trying to record those states. Yeah,
it'd be nice just to like make a list of all of the different ways and places that we went through this experience. But the thing that always stood out for me was when someone put this device on and they would get feedback from their mental state, they would immediately and intuitively try to shift their state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do that, suddenly you've just taken an entirely new point of reference on yourself. And which is like in meditation, you discover that you are not your thoughts.
Yep.
That's what that is. To take that new perspective and to say, what can I do to shift my perception, how I'm feeling? This is the you are not your thoughts experience. And it happens instantly. Crazy. And now I look back and see how profound that was all the way along, because we've now been, in the creative process of trying to create a tool to help people discover, themselves and inner practice. But just to see that the instant someone put this on and got a feedback, that's what happened. Magical.
Yeah. We just didn't realize it.
We didn't realize it. We had no idea how magical it was, but it was just like, oh, this is cool. We can build some cool stuff with this.
So once we realized it, where'd you go from there?
I got deep into meditation. The realization that as humans have undertaken this exploration in a very serious way gave like an unbelievable amount to start to explore. I think with anything that we learn, it's really hard to imagine what's possible, because you're always starting from a place of what you know, which is, very close, and you can see over the next threshold just a little bit, right? But ultimately, like doing anything new is just is a totally unknown world out there. What happens when people devote themselves to training different states of consciousness, different ways of experiencing, different inner skills? I had no idea. And the only thing you can do is look to what people have achieved and to talk to people and to read accounts of things, because I understood that there was for me to try to evaluate the possible from where I was experienced, from where I was at that time, it was fundamentally limited. Like it's still limited right now. Who knows what's possible? All I know is this is how I feel right now, and I know that if I continue, putting effort into learning something, I'll change. But where does it go? So I became super interested in going down that road and understanding both what seems to be possible based upon what people say, but then also trying it for myself.
What are some of the shifts that you've experienced through meditation? Some of the understandings.
I would say the biggest shift for myself, the biggest shift in understanding was that when I'm emotionally triggered, I would do things to distract myself, to disconnect from what's happening. And the recognition that when you disconnect, you stop receiving whatever that moment has to teach you. You end up doing things to make yourself feel safe and unafraid. And that process, which is happening, all the time as we go throughout our days, or at least as I go throughout my days, was keeping me from really taking in precious new information and experiences because I was essentially blocking them. And this sort of thing can manifest, badly in relationship because you have an emotional reaction to something. That's one possibility. Another way of looking at it is you are just not present to appreciate what's there because you've taken yourself away as a protective measure. So just being able to witness clearly this happening and that there was something that I could do about it to be more present with what's happening and to continue my growth and learning, like that was just massively life-changing.
So how does this then reflect back to what we were creating in Muse?
Well, I think the practices of meditation have proven themselves to be enormously successful. Developing your attention is one of the, or perhaps the most fundamental thing that you're doing, is the ability to pay attention to your experience and not have whatever happens shake that ability to stay with it. And the techniques to do that are quite simple, not easy to practice, but quite simple, but actually work extremely well. So I'd say Muse, first and foremost, is all about that. It's all about being able to train your attention and to train your ability to pay attention on purpose through a variety of different kinds of experiences. But the other thing that it does is to give you a number of starting points to become more curious about your inner world. And there are many different dimensions to that. So I really believe that increased awareness really is what allows you to improve your ability to move through life with a greater grace, because you know how to flow with things as they are. So having a tool to help someone, anyone, have the motivation and curiosity to go and explore the different pieces and how they interrelate starts to open the doors. And what I've experienced generally with meditation practice is once you've cracked open the door a little bit on something, then the fruit of seeing what's there and learning from it gives you more energy to open it further. And there's a virtuous cycle there when it comes to opening and developing awareness.
Yeah.
So I think that Muse can play a really helpful role in that, to give starting points to develop that curiosity and open the doors a little to start to become aware of something. And I think that's really valuable. So
that's certainly the experience that I had. So I came from not having any formal meditation practice, being a psychotherapist. So I was certainly aware of meditation and, would bring it to my patients and try to implement it with my patients. But I couldn't establish a formal practice myself until we really started working on Muse as a meditation tool.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the first time I was able to really pay attention to my breath, notice when my mind was wandering, and then choose to come back to my breath, and did that consistently for a week or two at a time, it opened up this world of like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And these are the sensations and qualities that I now get in the world because of it. And then it became very compelling. And then I wanted to just keep doing it because I wanted more of that experience. I wanted more of that, like in the moment. I wanted more of that thing. And then all of the reading that I'd been doing for, the 15 preceding years made sense to me.
Yeah.
It was like the whole world of meditation opened up once I could finally get it, just the first taste of it. And then I wanted more and more and more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting how it's one of those things where it really is experiential until you've experienced it for yourself and experienced the meaning behind the words.
Yeah.
Then everything you read, you like, it's kind of, lukewarm.
Yeah.
It's
thin.
It's thin. It's just like, oh, it's like this is poetic.
Yeah. Those words sound really nice.
So I think, there's interesting that there's a bunch of really, not a bunch, there's loads of really incredible writing that's happened over the ages. And when you start to have some of these experiences, you can you penetrate them in an entirely new way. And it's
Yes.
just like, oh my God.
Now that's what they mean. Right.
That's right. It's like seeing a beautiful work of art, for the first time with an eye that can actually receive it. A similar thing has happened to me with art. When I'd go into art galleries as a young child, I'd be like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to stand in front of this pretty picture and like see something cool. And I would walk around and like stand and look at things, and I had all the right sort of art observing behaviors.
Didn't have a beard to stroke at the time.
Didn't have a beard to stroke. And then I started noticing later in life, I was just like, wow, someone has captured an experience that connects with an experience deep inside of me.
Yeah.
And, things become more and more captivating. And suddenly wasn't standing there because I was the right art gallery behavior. I was standing there because I was just riveted by what this piece was evoking in myself, because I was able to see it in a new way. And it's kind of like that. Like, I open up books now, I'm like, holy crap, this is amazing.
This is really interesting because you and I have never talked about this, but I talk about something very, very similar. And the example that I always use is listening to a love song on the radio after you've fallen in love for the first time.
Yeah.
So prior to being 15 years old, I would never been in love, and I wondered why there were all these love songs on the radio. And I loved the Beatles, and it all sounded really good, but I couldn't understand why people were just obsessively talking about love and nothing else on the radio. And then I fell in love. For a brief moment, I'm sure, but I was in love. And then I listened to the radio for the first time afterwards in my dad's old Oldsmobile. And it was just like, whoa, that's what they're talking about. And wanted to listen to it over and over and over again because it took on this whole new meaning.
Yeah, that's super cool.
That's funny.
I think, one of the byproducts of how meditation is practiced is many techniques focus on sensation. And you almost in a, it's like you're casting a magnifying glass on some aspect of your experience and watching it with the utmost intensity. And it's super boring. It's just like, I'm going to watch my breath. Like
for 20 minutes.
For 20 minutes,
Maybe an hour.
But what's interesting is when we pay attention to anything, your appreciation and understanding of it really deepens. And a byproduct of really paying attention to different parts of your body, internally, externally, energetically, emotionally, is you really become a connoisseur of experience. And suddenly, if you allow yourself, every single moment in your life suddenly develops this incredible richness because you know how to take it all in.
Yeah.
And that's something that I didn't really expect at all from meditation. Coming at it simply from, okay, I know that I am training my mind and my ability to, not get carried off in discursive thought, but rather, the appreciation of the sensation of living and experiencing or drinking my coffee has so much nuance to be discovered over and over again.
Your breath becomes delicious.
It does.
I describe the experience of feeling my breath now as delicious because when you sit there alone with it, you fall in love with the sensation of breathing. It just feels amazing.
Yeah.
It feels delicious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Watching the breath is a fascinating experience. Sometimes when people ask me the value of Muse, I relate how when I first started meditating, I would pay attention to my breath. But I would find that the experience of the breath sometimes would be accompanied by an imagination of the breath, which is a thinking process. So if you think about meditation as really the practice of being in present moment sensation, imagination, thinking about the breath is not that.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this like back and forth that happens. And so whenever I start to dive into the imagination of the breath, which is anticipating it, it's thinking about the inhale and exhale, thinking about what it's going to feel like, comparing it to last time. As you start to do that, you start to live in that self-fulfilling idea of the breath. It's your model of it. So whenever we do anything, we end up with a model of how we do it. And whenever we're on autopilot, this is what's happening. We're operating in like our mental model of what's happening. So I would be there in the model of breathing, just in my understanding of it. And when I do that, I found I was disconnecting from the new experience that each breath is.
Mm.
Every breath is different. You never know what's going to happen. And sure, it's going to be similar to the last one and the one before that, but the things are ever changing around us. They're never the same. So to allow yourself to fall into that predictive cycle is really, you've stopped yourself from living in the beautiful,
active breathing,
unpredictable unfolding that life is. And I find this is that knowledge now that I've actually gained through meditating with Muse, because it actually, helps you differentiate between those two experiences.
When you're actually in the moment versus when your mind is dreaming about the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Easy trap to fall into, because like, hey, I'm with my breath, right? But no, I'm dreaming about my breath. I'm not just like appreciating that moment to moment happening. And when we get into experiences in our lives, this is a very easy trap to fall into. It's like you are with the idea of what you're doing, and you're not actually present for this mysterious unfolding that it is. And if you do any sports, I mean, this is when you get tripped up, right? So when you stop being fully connected to what's happening and you're in the pattern, that's when you trip. It's when you trip over a hurdle. It's when you crash on your snowboard, right?
Which I'm sure you've done many times
I've
before.
done it many times. It's when we have car accidents, because we're on autopilot and we feel like we're present, and the patterns that are within us actually are very well trained and they can operate on their own very effectively. But that's different than actually being with the actually moment to moment unfolding that's always occurring. And yeah.
So you created Muse, this beautiful device that gives you real-time feedback on your brain during meditation. What was it like seeing it go out into the world and have people actually starting to use it and to improve their meditation practice with it?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Like, I really care about, I mean, if you're going to buy something with the intention of improving your life with it, I really hope it's going to work for you, especially if I was involved in creating it. So I'm continuously terrified when people buy Muse, because I really want them to have an experience like I did, where this was so provocative and moving and beneficial. But I mean, obviously you can't have any control over people's experience. We're all
Thankfully, people are individual.
We're all our own
things,
humans,
yeah.
right? But it doesn't change the fact that I'm like afraid that I haven't done the best job I can possibly do, because I know that we're like, it matters. Yeah. It really matters. So yeah, I'm like always terrified. I think it's amazing, and when I hear reports back from people who have huge success with it, I feel great. But like, I'm continuously terrified. And every time I give a Muse to someone, like, I have a bit of that terror of like, I hope this serves you. And if it doesn't serve you, I hope it just disappears and doesn't affect what might come next. Maybe you find another meditation practice or another thing that really helps you, bring what you want into your life. So I don't know, maybe I'm just an afraid-y cat, but I am like continuously nervous and afraid with anything that I put out there, with not the intention of just being like a whimsical piece of art, but rather, the intention here is this allows you to bring some meaningful, lasting, positive change into your life.
So luckily we've heard back from lots of people that it seems to have done that.
I feel better and better every day, but we're, about to release a new beast in the world, right? Which we think is totally amazing, but I'm just like, again, oh my God, I hope it's going to work.
So we're recording this podcast on October the 27th. On October the 30th, it'll be after that when you listen to this, because we can't tell anybody about it until October the 30th. But on October 30th, we're releasing something new that you created.
So exciting.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah. I have it right here.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to do the reveal on it?
We can do a reveal.
Yeah. I'll let you do the reveal. You can hide it in this like magical singing bowl.
So for anybody who's not watching this, currently he has hidden the thing inside of a gong. And we can now reveal what it is. So this is the new Muse.
This is Muse 2.
Yeah.
Yes, it does look like the old one.
But it's smaller and lighter.
Here's Muse 1. We can go brain to brain,
Yeah, head to head.
head to head.
But the magic with Muse 2 is that you can also go heart to heart.
You can also go heart to heart. I know. Isn't that delicious? um,
So tell us about this beauty.
well, one thing that happens when you do a bunch of meditation is you become much more attuned to your heart. And this notion of opening your heart has real meaning behind it. And probably, yeah, for me, what has been the sweetest part of having a meditation practice is discovering a much greater emotional connectivity with myself and others. And so, yeah, this sweetness of living, it's palpable. So really exciting to have something which now can tap into the activity of your heart in this experience that Muse can help you discover.
So the new Muse has a new sensor on the inside. It's a PBG sensor that actually tracks your heart rate.
That's right. So they look, so it's important to point out that we kept these two, the new Muse, looking almost the same because actually fitting something to your head in a way that's comfortable and can adequately pick up your brain signals is extraordinarily challenging. And
we forgot about the long details in the story of making Muse, and the hundreds of heads that we tried to fit this thing on,
getting
it to fit on every single head.
Of ending up with something which seems extraordinarily simple but works amazingly well. And even though we spent so much time at it, like I think we really lucked out. I don't know how many heads we tried. You know,
I would walk around with a tape measure in my back pocket so that I could measure people's foreheads.
Anyway, the fact that it fits so many people is astounding. And so we just didn't want to break something that worked incredibly well. And so we kept it, for the most part, shaped exactly the same, but it's now a lot smaller and thinner. So when I wear my headphones on top, I don't feel that there's the Muse engine has shrunk a great deal. But the real innovation with Muse 2 is the addition of a heart sensor and some really incredible algorithms that we've used with the heart and also the motion sensors that are in the device to help you tap into different things that are happening inside of yourself.
Can you describe the experiences?
I can. We have there's kind of like a Muse totem up here, which is very cool, and it's probably not visible in the video, but you know, there is a body, there's a heart, there's lungs, and there's a brain. And so when you learn meditation, the first thing you do is you learn how to sit. And this really just comes down to the fact that if your body is not at rest, then it's very difficult for your mind to rest. And so meditation postures are upright, so you're really awake, but they're also extraordinarily restful. And it's important to find that way of sitting because that provides a great foundation. So we wanted in this new embodiment of Muse to really address the more filled out spectrum of meditation practice, because we found, you know, in our own exploration that there are many things that are super valuable along the way. Ultimately, you know, it all comes down to the mind, but we are embodied. You know, this is also our mind. And so
your physical body.
Your physical body. So Muse 2 addresses your body stillness. It addresses the activity of your heart. It addresses your ability to breathe in different ways to allow you to attune your mind, calm the body, energize yourself. And it also, just like Muse 1, allows you to observe and work with the activity of your mind directly. So all of these things are all happening all the time. You know, you ride a bicycle, all the different bits have to weave together into this complicated orchestrated movement. Sometimes I find that when I meditate, it feels like I am balancing a bicycle. So I'm feeling my attention wane and I rein it back. I'm feeling pretty lax and I do things to energize. There's this constant navigation where you're keeping yourself on track. And so understanding how to do that is something where if you can draw attention to the different components and work with them, now you've built some basic tools and it's much easier to put them back together in a holistic experience.
So Muse 2, in addition to giving you real-time feedback on your brain activity like the original Muse does, Also gives you real-time feedback on your posture, so you can
Mhm.
find the right way to sit, on your heart, so you can learn to interact with your heart, and on your breathing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Anybody who has practiced yoga understands the importance of the breath. In many ways, the yoga practice, that's the first and most important thing is how you're breathing. And there's a whole practice they call pranayama, and there are different techniques that you use for different purposes. And we may have heard of techniques like a relaxing breath where you exhale for longer. There are techniques where you inhale and you hold, exhale, then hold. There are techniques where you breathe through alternate nostrils. There are many different techniques, and as you practice them, you discover the potential it has for yourself to feel differently and to work with your inner world. But when you first do it, some of these techniques, it's difficult because you're just trying to practice it and just trying to learn it. You're not able to really experience what it's doing for you. Like anything else, there's a practice involved before you've internalized it and you can actually put it to useful work for yourself.
Yeah.
So the idea behind the breath component of this experience was to give a framework where someone can learn different techniques of breathing and understand how they're progressing in bringing their body and their heart into harmony with that style of breathing.
That's amazing. So what's the actual experience like when you're doing a breath exercise? What do you hear or feel?
So there's a sound that you hear, which is in some cases it's a voice, in other cases it's a musical guide. But basically, it makes it very clear when you should be inhaling air into your lungs, when you should be exhaling, for how long, how deeply, and also moments where you should be holding your breath. So there's a lot of nuances in some of these different techniques, and so we use verbal guidance and sound as a way to help you learn what to do, but then when you practice it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it accompanies you for the practice. So it's always there. Just like if you were doing this in a group, sometimes they'd use a drum to help you know when to breathe. Sometimes they use verbal guidance. There's a cue to help you keep pace from getting lost so you can actually continue to do the practice.
And you can also track your breathing during this process, so then you can see the data afterwards.
Exactly, yeah. So the value of having a tool that measures is you can start to see how you're doing and see your progress over time. So what Muse is actually doing for the breath practice is it's monitoring two things. It's monitoring your heart, which actually changes its rhythm based upon your breathing. Every time we inhale, our heart rate increases a little. And when we exhale, it decreases. So we can actually look at how your heart rhythm is varying up and down with that breathing technique.
It's amazing.
So as you really get settled and accustomed to the practice and you are able to calm the body down, you'll notice more and more that the variation in your heart's rhythm really becomes coherent and resonant with that style of breathing. So similarly, the body also moves. And so these are two components. What you'll find if you're breathing, if you pay attention, is your body is always moving. And it's the breath which is the primary driver of that movement. Obviously, when we...
when I inhale, I lift up slightly. I exhale, I lift down slightly. There's this little variation that happens.
There's a variation, like it moves the mass around in our body. It changes our dimensionality. As you inhale, your chest opens. Your shoulders come back. You get a little taller. There's all these dimensional changes. But if you're sitting with a soft body, you're relaxed. When you breathe, it actually feels like there's a wave of motion that goes through your body. It'll go down to your fingertips and down to your toes, up to the top of your head. And so part of what we're looking at with the motion sensors is to what extent your whole body is moving in concert with your breath. And as you build that skill and you're able to relax into it, that is the kind of the totality of the body movement is just how the breath is massaging it.
That's amazing. So your breathing moves you.
Right. Yeah. And if you watch...
You are a breathing body.
I love watching professional athletes in whatever they're doing because nothing's out of place. Everything that's happening in their body at any point in time is 100% the thing that they're they're doing. There's no busyness. It's like one beautiful wave of motion. And when we can really allow ourselves to rest in a pattern of breathing, that's what happens to us. Like all the little ripples in the pond like go away, and what you have is just the swell of the tide. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking, are we seeing the movements of the tide, if your breath is the tide, or are we seeing a bunch of chop in the waters?
Mm. And so you can also track the heart. Tell me about the heart and why this is meaningful.
The heart's fascinating. I think this is one of these things where it's going to be very interesting to see what people discover and learn through it. So we know that different people have varying abilities to sense their own heartbeat, minus touching yourself in a place where you can feel it very acutely. Certainly, most of us have experienced when we're really stressed or we're working out really hard, you'll stop and you'll feel your heart thudding.
Yep.
So we'll notice it when it is in some more extreme state. But when we're relaxed, we may not necessarily feel its activity. But what's interesting is your heart beat varies quite wildly. And I think this idea that our heart is kind of like a clock, like a metronome, is the sort of dominant view. But in actuality, it would make a terrible metronome or clock because it just beats all over the place. And although if you were to look at your wrist wearable, it would, or your chest strap, it would say, oh, right now your heart is like 75 BPM. And, a few minutes later, it's 75 BPM, and then it might be 74. It's just like, oh, it's just like continuously like beating at 75 beats per minute. And that's just the clock speed. But in actuality, it's wildly varying. From one beat to the next, it could go from 80 BPM down to 55 BPM. This happens. And it primarily, especially if we're relaxed, it flows with our breath. You breathe in or you breathe out. There's this moment-to-moment change. And so what we found is there's the breath, and there's also the flow of feeling in the body, your emotions. Your thoughts play a role in this. There are many things which cause the heart to change its rhythm moment to moment. This feeling of my heart skipped a beat, right? Or you feel this like, you get scared, you feel this, it's like your heart leaps out of your chest. There are moments that we experience these things because they're an extreme experience, but this is also happening at the minute scale.
Yeah.
And so being able to start to experience your heartbeat from moment to moment on this minute moment to moment level allows us to start to build the connective understanding between the ebb and flow of emotion and energy in our bodies and how we participate with that through our breath and the things that we can do to energize ourselves and to relax ourselves becomes more apparent because this sort of fundamental energy center, we're totally tuned into its activity, and you can appreciate how A connects to B. Yeah.
And so what's the experience that you've built into Muse that allows you to feel that? I'm asking a leading question. I've obviously experienced it many times, and it's beautiful, but can you describe it for everybody?
Yeah, I often forget to just get to the most basic thing. Part of it's because I imagine all the different ways that we're going to be able to do this in the future. Mm-hmm. Currently, if someone gets the new Muse right after we launch it, the primary experience is your heartbeat is a drum beat.
Yeah.
So you get to experience your heart as a drum. And whenever you hear that drum change tempo, you know that your heartbeat is changing tempo in lockstep with that. In fact, there is a simplicity of there is a drum beat for every beat of the heart. And then what we do to help draw out some of the information about how it's going up and down, just like a drummer would add a bit of a flourish to their composition or their playing, you'll hear a bit of a flourish when your heart rate is increasing, and you'll hear the beat simplify as it goes down. And so there's a fundamental, which is your heartbeat, and then there is the sort of dramatic improvisation that your heart is creating, in the composition with these little drum flourishes and other sounds that happen.
The experience is incredibly gorgeous. The first time I got to hear my heart beat with Muse 2, it was just overwhelming. And everybody in the room was standing inside of my heartbeat, thud, thud, thud. And from doing that, I become very aware of my heartbeat regularly.
Yeah.
And as it is, I've had a Fitbit Alta for a while, so I'm already invested in my heart and, understanding when I should be at my maximal heart rate while I'm exercising, checking my resting heart rate. But that did not in any way prepare me for the experience of feeling my heart. Like seeing a number on your wrist doesn't really have connection to what's really going on inside of you.
Yeah.
And once I started to connect to my heartbeat, I could then become aware at any moment of what my heart was doing.
Yeah.
And so now I'm far more aware. Every time I'm a little bit stressed or a little anxious, I feel my heart rate increasing. I might have not even noticed that I was becoming stressed or anxious, but now I can feel my heart increasing. And so then that becomes a cue to do a breathing exercise and calm it down. Let the tension out of my body, and I can feel it calming down as I do. Once you become aware, it becomes this incredible barometer for your moment to moment stress and a cue to bring in your relaxation to help to even it back out again.
Yeah. Something that also happens, or I think is important to talk about, is for some people when they experience their heart beating, it is a cue that like something's wrong. And so it can provoke a cycle of anxiety. And one thing that I've found after doing this, I also get anxiety, so I can relate. One thing I've found when you listen to your heart and you become familiar with its beating all the time, usually the moment where the sensation breaks through this sort of threshold of consciousness is just like, oh, shoot, like my heart's pounding, like, I know I'm stressed. Now there's more of like, you're always sort of aware of its presence. And, experiencing it is no longer a sign of warning, but rather you start to appreciate that this variation, up and down variation, is something that's always happening, and not a cause for alarm, but actually a way of being in tune with yourself. And I think as far as having this sort of early warning system for things that are going wrong, we're continuously navigating. And I think one of the very cool things about meditation is when you grow a keener sense of how things are flowing, you can really see things earlier and be able to navigate skillfully in a realm where everything actually is totally manageable, because we're always going like this. It's really when we get to the extreme where we're triggered by something where we start to lose control. But you become much better never getting close to that point, because you can sort of do what's necessary in the moment. And I think this is what you're getting at there.
Yeah, meditation allows me to see much more readily, like when I start to feel an emotion about something. And when in the past it would have been like, whoa, flying off the handle, it's like, well, okay, I can see it's arising. All right, just let's calm it back down. I can observe the arising while the rest of me calms.
Or, emerge the arising and then work with it, which is like sailing the wave, which sometimes, like in some ways when we are stressed, that is excitement and it's energy. And something that I've learned more recently is because I would associate that surge of energy with something bad, I would really not be friends with it. And now when I start to appreciate that, even when I am excited in a very positive way, it's the same feeling. And now I'm just like, whoa, I have this amazing burst of energy. How can I sail with that and actually have it energize what I'm doing instead of going, oh my God, I'm so freaked out and stressed right now, like something bad's going to happen.
Best public speaking tip: when you feel the nervousness, just interpret it as excitement. And then all of a sudden you're not afraid of public speaking.
Just judo flip that perception into something which is a positive thing.
They both feel the same.
They both feel the same. But I think
Lisa Barrett Feldman, neuroscientist, would tell you they probably are both the same. It's just our perception.
Yeah. I mean, my experience of that is somebody told me that. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. I'll do that, but I think you need to experience it a couple of times of being able to make the transition for it to really make it real for yourself. But once you can do it, you're like, oh yeah, like I can like totally use this amazing surge of energy, to bring a greater aliveness to what I'm doing.
Well, you've certainly used all the amazing surges of energy in your life to make phenomenal things.
It's interesting that you say it like that. I never think about it like that, but it's true. And I think what arises for me is that those are ways that I've practiced over and over again of channeling my energy. And, having done that for a long time, I really know how to put that energy to work in those ways. But it doesn't mean that those are the only ways that I can put that energy to work. It's actually what's comfortable for me. And so I think, it's important to realize that we can learn how to do that with almost anything with practice. And it really is what we practice that becomes who we are. So I learned at an early age how to channel that energy into a certain kind of activity. Building something with my hands, solving a, logical, technical problem. But there are other ways that I'm sure I can learn, and I feel like I've been learning to channel that energy in different ways and to feel comfortable, and really expand totally new dimensions of what's possible for me. But it's just so easy to stick with what you know. It's just you go to your comfort zone.
Well, thank you so much for letting all of us inside your head so that we can learn a little bit from what you know and start to see what might be possible in all of our lives. And thank you for building a tool that can show people how to learn new skills and learn about themselves and their body and their potential and what might be possible.
And thank you for being part of this journey with me. And it wouldn't have happened without you and without the crazy, strange chemistry that you, Trevor, and I had in the beginning, and it still carries us today.
Awesome. Thanks.